Welcome to Hurt at Work, a Kentucky workers' comp podcast. Today, Louisville workers' compensation attorney Scott Scheynost is going to provide helpful information, tips, and advice for injured workers and their families. Scott's goal is to help you to maximize the benefits you receive. If working's got you hurting, sit back and listen to Scott address topics that matter to you. All right, welcome back, Scott Scheynost. Today on this podcast episode, we're going to talk about workers' compensation-related car accidents, which is kind of odd for some people, but yeah, it actually does happen.
It happens a lot, yeah. Happy to see you again, Jim. Yeah, a lot of times people are at work. They might be a truck driver. They may be driving a boss to work or something.
Could be a sales rep.
A sales rep in another state. So you have different situations where people get hurt operating a motor vehicle for their employer. There's a couple of different angles in this. There's angles about maybe getting hurt out of state. Whether or not it's Kentucky, it can be. We're not going to talk too much about that today. I think what most people are interested in is who pays for something. Right. If you get hurt at work while you're driving a car. And a lot of that depends on where you're at. We're going to talk about Kentucky today.
Well, I know a lot of us think about workers' comp. Well, I was either in the plant or at the factory or I was in the office or something. But again, as you said, there are a lot of people who actually drive for a living or they're in transit for company business. Right. And this is when these things happen. Right. So let's kind of jump in and talk about, again, Kentucky's laws are Kentucky's laws. Yes. Workers' comp is different by state. Yeah. But as it relates to this, I guess the first part, you mentioned to me as we were prepping for this episode that workers' comp is considered the primary. What does that actually mean? Right.
That means if you have a motor vehicle accident and get injured while you're at work, let's just keep it easy with, say, a delivery driver, and you're a captive delivery driver. You're not one of these Uber drivers or Domino's contractors or anything like that, but you're working for a company and you're delivering dry ice to somebody, and you're hired by that company, and you're paid by them, and you're driving their truck. That's the simplest one. There's a lot of variations, but that's the simplest one. If you get hurt while you're driving that truck, and you're hurt during the course of your employment, okay? Normally when you're driving a company truck, you're in the course of employment. So when you get hurt, who pays for your injuries as a result of that? First of all, there's a lot of things that can happen. There could be somebody responsible, a third party. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit. There's stuff in Kentucky called PIP, personal injury protection, that might apply that's not available in other states, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the main thing is who is primarily responsible for paying your medical treatment. If it happened at work, the motor vehicle accident happened at work, then workers' compensation is what we call primary. So most of your medical treatment, most of your lost wages will all be paid by workers' comp. And there's other insurance available, and we'll get into that in a minute, but the primary entity that pays for your medical treatment and your lost wages is a workers' comp.
Let me ask you this. Does the question of negligence, who the at-fault driver is, does that enter into this?
It does, but it enters into some stuff later on down the road about who may have to pay for some things workers' comp doesn't pay for. Okay. And some things like that, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But the simplest, purest form of who pays for seeing the doctor, who pays for me while I can't work and I'm recovering from this broken leg I got from the accident, all that's paid for by workers' comp at the beginning. Workers' comp's primary. Now, if workers' comp doesn't pay for some stuff, and workers' comp's got a lot of built-in limitations in it. Sometimes workers' comp doesn't want to pay for a doctor. Sometimes if you're a high wage earner, workers' comp only pays 2/3 of your wages, and there's limits on that. If you're a high wage earner, let's say that you're an executive for a company and you're making, just as an easy number, $200,000 a year, your average weekly wage is going to be $4,000 or $5,000, but the limit in Kentucky is around $1,100. So you have excess coverage that's available there. There may be some other entities that come in then, okay? The first one would be PIP, personal injury protection. In Kentucky, we have no fault. What workers' comp does not pay, and you might be eligible to receive, PIP may end up paying. And this gets real complicated because most people have PIP. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can have added PIP. That's a whole other podcast. But remember, workers' comp's primary, but if they don't pay for everything, then PIP may come in and pay for some stuff.
And PIP is roughly about $10,000 there for bodily injury and some lost wages primarily.
For most people who have basic PIP, it's $10,000 that's available to pay for medical treatment and lost wages. Lost wages would be limited to $200 a week. And again, sometimes workers' comp doesn't want to pay for a certain doctor for some reason, where you could turn that into PIP. If you're a high wage earner and you're making $4,000 a week and workers' comp only pays $1,100, well, you might get another $200 from PIP. Most people have the basic amount of PIP, which in Kentucky is $10,000. I have added PIP because I deal with this a lot. And I've got a couple $100,000 on top of that, so I can get a little bit extra. Most people don't have added PIP, but you might if you've got an insurance agent that sets you up and has you very well insured. And you can never have enough insurance, but if you're very well insured, you may have added PIP that might pay some extra benefits here too. Now, in addition to this, you may have some other stuff that's available. You may have your own health insurance that might pay. If you have a third-party claim where somebody else is responsible, that person and probably their liability insurance carrier might pay for some of this eventually. The problem about the third-party claim is they take a long time to get to the end of it because you've got to prove somebody was at fault. You've got to prove your damages. I don't ever see any third-party liability carrier deciding to pay you money at the beginning. They wait for you to recover from your injury 2 years down the road and to figure out what your case is worth and then try to resolve it then. So at the very beginning, which is when people need it the most, workers' comp's primary. They'll pay for everything. If workers' comp's not available, then you got PIP. Now, to have PIP, first of all, you've got to have PIP on the car. Some companies like TARC, which is the bus company here in Louisville, they don't carry PIP. They can waive out of that, okay? So your company needs to have PIP on their car to get it through them. But if they don't have it, then you might be able to get it somewhere else. You may have it on your own car. We have what's called a Kentucky Assigned Claims Plan, which means if your employer doesn't have it on their car, you might be able to get it through the Kentucky Assigned Claims Plan. But you've got to file an application, prove they don't have it, and get it that way. So PIP is out there. PIP is no fault, just like workers' comp. Doesn't matter who's at fault. Generally, you can find PIP somewhere if you need it. You can waive it. If you're in your own car and you're driving for the company and you've waived it, you may not be able to get it. But if you're in a company vehicle, even if the company doesn't have PIP, you can get it from the Kentucky Assigned Claims Plan. Most people have it, though, and usually it's somewhere that's available for you to get in addition to the workers' comp, okay? Now, on top of all that stuff, you've got other insurance might be available, your regular health insurance, Medicare, stuff like that.
Well, and that always confuses people. If I'm in a wreck, why would I want to use my own insurance if somebody else hit me? And that's really, it comes down to coverage and being able to get treatment quicker, right?
Yes, that's really the main key.
I've listened to some of your podcasts.
Yeah, that's right. Excuse me. The problem about getting a third party is usually time. If you've got a good third party case, you're probably going to get something. But again, they're just not going to write a check that week. They're going to want to make sure they pay for everything. They can wrap the case up. And, if you've got ongoing medical treatment and they're talking about doing a surgery, it could be years down the road before that happens, before you're able to resolve that. So in the meantime, you got to have that operation. You don't want to be walking around with a limp. So hopefully workers' comp will pay for it. I deal with a lot of workers' comp. We just did another podcast on IMEs where workers' comp carriers try to get out of stuff by sending you to doctors that say you don't need surgeries. If they're playing that game, you might be able to submit it to PIP. Well, a lot of doctors charge more than $10,000 for PIP. What am I going to do now? Well, you got your regular health insurance. Let's try that. Oh, I don't want to use that. But you don't have a choice unless you want to wait 5 years for this.
Right.
So,
right.
A lot of times as an attorney, it seems like my number one job is to try to find out a source that can take care of paying for this. If it's work-related, that usually takes care of a lot of stuff right then because we can deal with a workers' comp carrier. They play their games, and, we're used to dealing with that too. It helps if it's a car accident because you got PIP, and a lot of people have private health insurance too. In the long run, you've got the third-party claim. And we'll make it real complicated because the third-party claim, a lot of times people that cause the accident only have the minimum liabilities in Kentucky, $25,000. Well, if your workers' comp carrier's paid $50,000 for your surgery and you being off work, and this other guy's got $25,000, who gets that $25,000? That's another podcast we'll talk about.
Yep.
The bottom line is you got to get in a fight basically with your own workers' comp carrier over what's called their subrogation claim against this tortfeasor. Now, if that happens, hopefully you have a thing called underinsured motorist coverage in Kentucky. And this is your own personal policy. I've got that. You're not required to do that. Most people have it. A lot of people don't because it costs extra money. You don't see it a whole lot with motorcycles for different reasons. But that's another source of payment for your third-party claim. It gets real interesting because it makes it a lot harder for workers' comp to recover against your own insurance company, not the tortfeasors, which is another subject of the podcast.
And the tortfeasor's the negligent party.
The party that caused the accident. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm going back to law school and having a flashback here. I like that word tortfeasor, too.
There you go.
It just sounds more important than the darn guy that hit me. But seriously, if you get involved in a motor vehicle accident, there's several sources of recovery here. The primary one, and that's why we call it primary, is workers' comp. Usually the secondary one is PIP. Then you got other sources available, your own health insurance company who will have a subrogation claim if they do pay for something we got to deal with too. Then you've got the tortfeasor, the other guy that hits his claim. You may have uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage, and if the tortfeasor has insurance, you may have an underinsured motorist coverage claim. If they don't have insurance, then you may have an uninsured motorist coverage claim. It gets complicated. There could be 5, 6, even more. I've had people involved in chain reaction accidents where I've had people involved where they've had 2 PIP carriers. I don't know how that happened, but they did. So, you can end up with 7 or 8 different insurance companies that you're dealing with, all of who wants to get paid by the other one from the chain reaction, and you're dealing with multiple what we call subrogation claims, because when an insurance company pays money out because of an incident, they expect to get that back from somebody else if somebody else was at fault. So if you have insurance either through workers' comp, PIP, your own health insurance, you have uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage, they're all going to want to get repaid from this person, and you're going to have to deal with that, which gets real complicated.
And if you're representing the client, I mean, do you kind of step into their shoes and you kind of fight those battles and you do do that?
There's a whole set of things. First of all, you got the regular workers' comp claim, which is a battle usually by itself that you got to deal with. You get all the stuff involved in a regular workers' comp claim, medical treatment, lost wages, permanent disability that we argue about in those. That by itself is a case by itself. Then you have, we got this going on with somebody else who wasn't paid. He was a high wage earner, and workers' comp didn't pay him back enough of his lost wages, where we're making a PIP claim in addition to his workers' comp claim to get him additional money. We're also trying to get some medical treatment of the workers' comp denied through the PIP carrier too. And then you've got the potential third-party case and all the stuff involved in that, the liability insurance carrier for the tortfeasor. I still like that word, the tortfeasor. And then you have your potential uninsured and underinsured motorist claim on top of that. It can get even more complicated if you've got a tortfeasor that has excess insurance and there's multiple tortfeasors involved.
But I guess the advantage there is, hey, there is a policy out there if we can just find it and figure out, how to get those funds released.
You never can have enough insurance involved in a claim. The more insurance policies available for you, usually the better off you're going to be.
Oh, I would think so.
You just got more steps to follow and hoops to jump through and things like that. But eventually, your chances of recovering as much as possible increase with a greater amount of coverage out there.
And Scott, in the previous episode, when we were talking about independent medical exams and some other issues, we talked about the fact that, as a workers' compensation attorney, you can represent clients all across Kentucky, right?
Yes. And same thing for these other cases in PIP and third-party cases. We can help them with those if they occurred in Kentucky. This kind of ties into that last session with IMEs, because a lot of times a workers' comp carrier will turn somebody down by sending them to an independent medical examination. And as I said before, there's nothing independent about it. They know what the doctor's going to say a lot of times before you show up. If that happens and you get turned down and it's a motor vehicle accident, you got PIP, well, we can use the PIP now to pay for your medical treatment.
Yeah, so again, there are many avenues. It's complicated, but that's why they would hire somebody like you.
Gate A closed, and we open up Gate B. And then, again, you've only got $10,000 in PIP usually. And once you go through that, then we're looking at your own health insurance, and now we're into Gate C. And then Gate D would be the third-party liability involved with the tortfeasor, and Gate E, D would be the uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. I mean, we can keep opening up and shutting gates depending on all the facts.
But again, that's the advantage of hiring somebody with your level of experience, is that you've gone down this road before. You kind of know what to do. You kind of know what to look for in certain policies, and you know which policies to actually look for.
Well, and that's really the big thing, is you need to talk to somebody, because you may think this is a workers' comp claim. You've been talking to the workers' comp carrier. You don't even know. I've had people didn't even know they had PIP, and that's pretty common. Then you've also got the third-party case. A lot of people think they've just got the third-party case, but they don't have the workers' comp and the PIP. So a lot of people hear things on TV, and you're seeing this show that was based on California law. Talk about LA law and how they recover. Well, we're not in California. This is Kentucky. California, I don't think, has PIP. Kentucky does. Every state's just a little bit different. The right to recover is a little bit different. In Indiana, for instance, the tortfeasor has to be at least 51% at fault to file a lawsuit against them. In Kentucky, if they're 1% at fault, you can file a lawsuit against them. So, that makes a big difference. If you've got $10 million in damages and the person's 1% at fault, you can still recover, $100,000.
Well, and I think people probably just heard that number, $10 million in damages. Well, yeah, that sounds like a golden ticket. Well, no, that means your injuries are probably pretty daggone severe.
The worst news I can give you,
the worst
news I can absolutely give you is you've got a great case.
Yeah.
That's absolutely the worst news I can give you, because you've suffered a horrendous injury, and no matter how much money I get you, it's not going to make up for what you've gone through. That's absolutely the worst news I can give somebody, is you got a great case. But at the same time, some people have good cases, and even if it's not a great case, it's still something that probably has a lot of value. All this is stuff that gets real complicated. You need to talk to somebody that deals with it. Most of this stuff is going to be handled on what we call a contingency fee, which means we don't charge you anything unless we get money for you. That means it's usually a free call to talk to me or some other attorney about it. As you can tell, I like to talk. Give me some caffeine, I'll go all day long. But, it's a free call to my office. Our number is 502-937-5287. Give us a call. We'll be happy to walk you through this stuff. And again, a lot of people just don't realize what's out there. And it amazes me how people just don't even want to call somebody and find out, with a free call, what might be available. But it doesn't hurt to call me or somebody else. We can kind of walk you through this stuff. The time to do this is really sooner, not later, because if you get involved in an argument with a workers' comp carrier, you want to make sure that the PIP's available, and you got to have all those contacts and information and claim numbers going. That can take a couple of weeks. If there's a third-party lawsuit, you got to get them involved in it. If you're using, workers' comp, or say your health insurance has popped in here, they've got a subrogation claim. You've got to deal with them to get all that stuff set up before you can get the case resolved. None of this stuff is an app on your phone where you press a button and you get a number.
Right, there is no easy button.
Everybody thinks there's an app on the phone that takes care of this, but there's not.
No.
There's a lot of footwork involved in this, getting medical records, getting things aligned with the different adjusters involved in this. There's just a lot of background information that has to occur, and I wish there was a magic button we could get to where it all happens, but it takes a little bit of footwork to get it together. And the sooner you talk to somebody, the sooner those foundations can be laid to get that stuff done to where it doesn't take as long. But, if you walk in my office today and you got this going on, we'll get going as fast as we can, but it still may be some delays because we've got to get information. We've got to get claims reports. We got to get police reports. We got to find out who the workers' comp adjuster is. We got to get your medical records. All that stuff takes a little bit of time. So the sooner you see me or somebody else, the better. I think most people are going to know when they need an attorney. If you've got something that's going to last more than a week or two, first of all, if it's due to a car accident, you probably got a pain and suffering claim in addition to workers' comp. And it's something I probably need to talk about just for a second. In workers' comp, you don't typically get pain and suffering. You get money for your permanent impairment. You get money for being off work. You get medical treatment. But the biggest element in a lot of people's lawsuits and a lot of damages you hear on TV and other sources is from pain and suffering. You don't normally get that in workers' comp. I think you can get a 3% impairment for pain in workers' comp, which is not much. But, if somebody loses a leg, that might be a 10% impairment rating depending on where the loss occurred in workers' comp. The loss in their leg, there's actually a book that tells the doctors how to give you that impairment rating depending on where the amputation occurs. But that might not be a big case because it's 10, 20%. Not anything you want to sneeze at, but still, if somebody loses their leg and we're talking about 10 or 20% impairment rating, that could be a huge case outside of workers' comp because of the pain and suffering involved in that. Somebody's going to have to deal with that the rest of their life. There's a lot of built-in limits in workers' comp. And in workers' comp, has got these limits so the insurance companies and the employers don't go bankrupt when you have a big case. A lot of that stuff doesn't apply when you've got a pain and suffering case to another third party, especially when they have what we call deep pockets or there's another source of income or insurance available to take care of that. So the bottom line is you probably need to talk to somebody, learn all these differences that are involved in this, pain and suffering, third-party cases, PIP, workers' comp. All this stuff can get real complicated. You got subrogation claims where you got to deal with these people. Even if you get money, you're going to have to pay somebody back. That becomes a little battle by itself. We handle these on a contingency fee. So give us a call. We're happy to go over it. I'm happy to bore you to death with all the details, but there are a lot of details in this, and you really need to know what they are and be prepared for it before you get too far into it.
Well, Scott, do us a favor and kind of explain the contingency fee and how that works and when you actually get paid and how you get paid.
For workers' compensation, my fee is limited to 20% of the value of the claim and benefits. That doesn't include medical benefits, or $18,000.
A maximum
is $18,000. Yeah, there's some built-in numbers that are a little bit less than that in certain situations, but for workers' comp, my fee can never be more than 20% and never more than $18,000. Now, all the other things involved in this, with a car accident, we usually charge a fee around 33%. It might be more or less depending on the facts. That's variable. There's actually a lot more work involved in the car accident itself than the workers' compensation claim. That's why the fee's higher. Some of these other things involving PIP, Usually we don't charge a fee on that unless there's been a denial PIP. A lot of times PIP's just filling out the forms and sending them in, proving stuff, and that's usually pretty easy to get going. Sometimes, though, you do have problems with that. The third-party cases, though, again, that just depends on the situation. We do handle those on a contingency fee. That percentage can vary, but usually about a third is a typical number on that. But again, your damages are higher, and the work involved in that's a lot higher too. So there's other things involved in this with the uninsured motorist coverage and the underinsured motorist coverage, and I don't want to get too technical, but we handle those on a contingency fee too.
But coming back to a contingency, basically, it's not an hourly fee. It's basically you have to win. You have to get a financial reward, basically, on behalf of your client.
First of all, no fee to talk to me to begin with. If you talk to me, don't like me, I'm not going to charge you a fee. Secondly, our fee will only be charged at the end of the case when we actually recover money for you. And then we may actually also have to incur expenses along the way. Those expenses will also be deducted at the end of the case after my fee is computed. But the bottom line is, in most situations, you're not going to pay me anything until we get money for you. So, it's no cost to call me. You don't have to normally worry about paying for anything while we're going through the case. At the end of the case is when we get paid.
And once again, Scott, I know we always try to wrap up the episode with this, but what number should someone use if they've listened to this and said, yeah, you know what, I'm dealing with something very similar, or maybe it's just workers' comp in general? What's the phone number they should call to get a hold of you?
My number is 502-937-5287. That's my office number, 502-937-5287. Call that number. We'll get back with you. If we're not there, we'll get a message and we'll get back with you. Also, I have a website, ScheynostLaw.com, ScheynostLaw.com. I'm sorry, ScheynostLaw.com.
Right.
Add the law.
And there's a contact form there. If they want to send an email, they can go right in there and send you a quick email about their situation.
There's also a chat feature there, too, that we can use and try to get back with you pretty fast on that, too. And then my actual email address is my first initial last name, Scheynost, SSCHEYNOST, at ScheynostLaw, ScheynostLaw.com, and you can send me an email that way, and I'll be happy to get back with you as soon as possible. If you can't tell I like to talk, give me a cup of coffee. I'll go on all day long. I try not to preach too much. But again, it's a free call. It doesn't cost anything to call me. If I talk too much and you don't like what I say, you don't know you don't owe me anything. I'm not going to charge you anything. We'll just move on. But again, we are happy to talk to you, see if we can help you in these situations. I'm happy to explain all these things. It gets a little bit complicated. I'm really not trying to make it complicated, but it can get kind of fuzzy on the different parties that are involved in this and how subrogation interplays with it. And, one's primary, one's secondary, one's, the third tier. But the bottom line is normally in a work-related injury that occurs while you're driving a car, workers' comp is going to be primary. That's usually you're going to have to deal with. But if you have problems with workers' comp or they don't pay for anything, there might be some other sources available. PIP, your own insurance, third-party tortfeasors claim, uninsured motorist coverage. And again, I'm trying.
Sometimes you just got to dig a little bit.
That's in my sense, it's kind of fun trying to find all the people and entities that might be available because there's just so many angles to all this stuff that can be played. A lot of them don't require a lawsuit. A lot of them don't require filing a formal claim. Some of these are designed to be pretty fast to get, especially the PIP. That's designed to get the benefits to you real fast. Workers' comp's designed to be that way too, but it doesn't seem like they always work that way. The other ones, especially with the third-party case, that's a fight, though, normally.
Yeah.
The third-party carrier, the liability carrier doesn't want to give you any money, and you've got to prove you're going to get something from them, and they want to wait to the end of the case. And usually it works out pretty good for you, but it just takes a while to get there. But, they're all a little bit different. They're all handled a little bit differently. There's different forms you got to fill out. We're happy to go through all this stuff. I'm happy to bore you with the details. I hope you don't have a big case, but if you do, you need to talk to me or somebody else because that all becomes even more important the bigger the case you have.
I think so. Scott, thank you for your time, and I want to thank the audience for listening to us today, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with more information about workers' compensation, personal injury, and some other types of claims you unfortunately may encounter.
Thank you for the coffee, Jim. Yeah.
You got it, my friend. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Hurt at Work. Scott will be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. For more information, be sure to visit ScheynostLaw.com. That's ScheynostLaw.com. You can also follow Scott's Workers' Comp office on Facebook. Until next time, be safe and remember, Scott's ready to help, especially when you and your family need it the most.